Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar, Moving and Staying Online. I'm Sharon Waitzer and I'm ASQA's Director of Engagement and Education Quality. Today is our fourth webinar for the Strategic Review of Online Learning. Since we last met on this topic earlier this year, the sector has made huge steps in online delivery of VET. We're excited to be here today with you as part of our commitment to share learnings from the strategic review and learn from your experiences about the risks, the opportunities and challenges in delivering quality VET online. Before we start our presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to the people, the cultures and the elders, past, present and emerging. I'm presenting from Sydney, which is the Gadigal land. Gadigal people form part of the Eora Nation. Before we start the session, I just want to go through how it'll run today. Today's session will be run for up to 60 minutes. In the first half, we'll show you 4 presentations. The second half, we'll have a Q&A panel discussion where we'll answer your questions and explore more about online learning. Today, we are using Slido, an online query tool. Slido helps us in the background form your questions during the presentations and the live Q&A session. You can start submitting your questions to Slido for the panel at any time during the webinar. Of course, your questions do need to be on topic. We are not able to answer questions specific to individual situations. We expect you to have a lot of questions for us. So we may group them under themes to cover as many questions as possible for the panel to answer. You'll see the majority of your questions live on Slido. If we can't get to all the questions, ASQA will still consider them and they will contribute to our thinking in the strategic review. So now that housekeeping is out of the way, now let's look at our presentations before we go to our Q&A session. With no further ado, I'm pleased to be able to present Dr. Kimberly Nink, who is in our strategic review and evaluation team. Kimberly will give an overview of early insights from ASQA's strategic review.
The strategic review of online learning commenced in late 2020 in response to the significant shift online by providers due to the circumstances surrounding the coronavirus pandemic. The review is really interested in both the benefits and the opportunities of online learning so that we can continue to regulate the sector effectively. As part of the strategic review, we've undertaken a range of consultations, including focus groups with current and former VET students to understand their experiences of the shift online and of learning and undertaking training during the pandemic. We've also undertaken a survey of providers' experiences of the shift of training and assessment online. And we've also, we continue to work with key stakeholders to identify if and where there might be challenges that providers still experience. And as part of our consultations, we've also undertaken internal consultations here at ASQA to build an understanding of what our experienced performance assessors are seeing when they audit providers who are delivering online, and using those insights to identify ways that we can continue to regulate VET delivered online as effectively as possible. As part of sharing early insights from the strategic review while it's underway, we've commenced publication of an Insights Papers series, and the second paper reports on what we found from student consultations. And in a really brief form, those students reported that there were some great benefits of online learning, including flexibility, convenience and choice. Students also identified some of the challenges of online learning, as including a sense of isolation, technical issues that they experienced, whether it be in terms of how the technology worked or their kind of learning curve in engaging with that technology. Students also reported that they acknowledged there was a huge effort by providers and trainers and assessors to shift training and assessment online, particularly in the early days of the pandemic. They did, however, note that in some cases they felt that some trainers and assessors didn't have the requisite digital literacy skills and identified a need for improvement in that area. One of the early insights of the strategic review is that while students expressed a desire to see stronger digital literacy skills amongst educators, providers responding to our provider survey also identified one of the challenges their trainers and assessors had in delivering VET online was addressing the diverse digital literacy capabilities of their learners. So I think, for us at ASQA, we really want to focus on what that developmental curve in delivering and learning online means for quality VET. And as part of our Insights Papers series, we'll be focusing on this question in 2022. In early 2021, we commenced a survey of providers' experiences of the shift to online. The survey was jointly administered with the National Centre for Vocational Education Research and was open for a period of 1 month. We've received over 1,200 responses, which corresponds to around 40% of the ASQA regulated VET population. The survey focused on changes that providers made in response to COVID, and we found that pre-COVID, around 50 or just over 50% of providers delivered some form of training or assessment online, and in response to COVID, this figure jumped to just over 80%. So you can see that providers made some significant adjustments in response to the social distancing requirements of the pandemic. Early indications are that this shift was experienced by all providers, regardless of provider size, provider type, or other factors such as geographic location. One finding from the results of the survey is that for providers delivering English language courses for overseas students, that there was a really significant shift online, and this can be attributed to the temporary regulatory flexibility that's in place at the moment for ESOS Act providers that allows training and assessment to be delivered purely online. One of the findings from the results of the survey of providers is that for many providers, they had to postpone or delay the practical components of some courses, but continued the theoretical components as an interim measure. And given that the survey was conducted in February, March in 2021, and in some form or another the social distancing requirements continued on, we are really interested in monitoring how those sort of adjustments and changes that providers made in response to the pandemic are impacting on the student journey now. We know that the strategic review is taking place at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has really catalysed activity in the online space, but we're also really aware that it's a trend that's going to continue, and so it's really important for us as the regulator to stay engaged in this space and to support the VET sector to identify ways we can continue to deliver quality VET online.
Thanks, Kiplee. I'm sure her comments have sparked several questions. I encourage you to send any questions using the Slido event code #onlearning. Our second presentation comes from Judith Keller. Judith is one of our ASQA's quality assessment managers. Judith will share insights about our resources available to guide providers delivering online.
The pandemic of 2021 has served as a catalyst for many training providers to develop, evolve and expand their training strategies and capability to support students in continuing to participate in vocational education and training whilst at a distance from their training provider. It is recognised that considerable efforts have been made by providers to adapt training resources, delivery methods, assessment and their interactions with students using a range of e-learning technologies and tools to engage them in meaningful learning experiences. Keeping the characteristics and needs of learners front and centre when moving online will continue to be essential to ensuring effective training and assessment strategies and practices. And this includes selecting and using delivery methods and technologies that will enable students to meet all of the requirements of the training product in which they are enrolled, consistent with the requirements of the relevant training package. The webinar Online Learning Beyond PDFs and Zoom was the third in a series of webinars hosted by ASQA during the past year, delivered in partnership with a number of vet sector stakeholders. These webinars explored the challenges associated with delivering online learning to vocational learners and offered ideas for building the capability of trainers and assessors delivering via distance and when using digital and e-learning technologies. Recordings of the webinars are available on ASQA's website and they highlight key considerations to ensure compliance with relevant regulatory requirements. In addition, a number of other organisations and vet sector stakeholders have developed and made available a range of resources to support providers as they have moved online. These have included, for example, practical how-to documents, webinars and other resources related to both the technical and non-technical aspects of delivering e-learning experiences and conducting assessment in an online environment. Again, links to a number of these resources can be found on ASQA's website, along with insights provided by members of the vet sector about implementing distance learning techniques. The need to build the digital capability and skills of trainers and assessors has been highlighted through multiple reports and surveys. In addition, the recent Training and Education Training Package Review is focused on contemporary competency requirements of vet practitioners, including e-learning and e-assessment capability. The rapid movement of many providers online during the pandemic has undoubtedly in itself created an organic uplift in skills and sharing of knowledge and expertise among trainers and assessors. And this uplift in skills is particularly relevant to the requirements of Clause 1.13 of the Standards for Registered Training Organisations, which requires that training and assessment is only delivered by persons who have current knowledge and skills in vocational training and learning, which in turn will inform their training and assessment. ASQA's Spotlight On series during 2021 included a segment focusing on trainer and assessor professional development. Again, this is available on ASQA's website and highlights that online learning has become a particularly vital tool as providers have dealt with the challenges of the past year, and that training providers who are agile and who can adjust to new technologies and are familiar with current vocational education practices may have more success in adjusting to operational challenges such as those presented by the pandemic. Our 2021 survey of training providers' experiences of online learning indicates that going forward, many providers will continue to stay online. This situation provides context for consideration as vocational training providers work to ensure that when moving forward, all trainers and assessors continue to undertake regular professional development and the knowledge and practice of vocational training, learning and assessment, as required under Clause 1.16 of the Standards for Registered Training Organisations. It is expected that professional development undertaken by trainers and assessors will naturally vary according to their needs, and this may, for example, include developing an understanding in how to use software systems, how to design training and to conduct assessment effectively in an online environment, or perhaps even how to create learning materials or how to validate student assessments that have been completed online.
Thanks, Judith. It's great to have a recap of the types of resources available. There's a lot of activity happening in this space over the past 2 years. Our next presenter is Dr. Deniese Cox. Deniese is an online education expert and coaches, educators and institutions to transition online. Deniese, over to you.
Hello everyone, and thank you ASQA for inviting me to share a few quick insights from current research about online vet. Today we are briefly going to touch on video content, your live online time and the content pathway. So let's start with video content. My research has found that what students are saying that they really appreciate video content is that it's convenient. They can engage with videos when it suits them, rather than being obliged to log in at a preset time. Therefore, for many units, it can be a good idea to develop some of your key concepts into digestible, bite-sized video content that students can engage with again and again as they need to. However, important tip here, avoid over-producing your content videos. Students are distracted by unnecessary gadgets, flashing animations, and gimmicks in general. That said, you also want to avoid that old disembodied voiceover PowerPoint. Students correctly expect that we have all long since moved past this type of presentation. You being really visible, it's important. Your facial expressions matter. Your body language matters. I've found that things like trust scores, retained information, and likelihood of taking action are all affected by the nature of your video content. So learn how to get it right, otherwise your videos, they're simply wasted time and resources. Now, not all courses have live online time in them. There are plenty of courses being run exceptionally well without it. But of course, lots of courses do have live online time with students, and it's really important that we use this time well, or students become disengaged. And that disengagement from a poorly run live online session, it then filters into more generalized disengagement from the overall learning. So take the time to learn what your students do and don't want from live online time. Now, my research has found that 2 things that students report appreciating most about live online sessions is getting active help with their assessments and getting questions answered in real time. A really important tip here, if you want your students to actually show up to your sessions, you must clearly communicate in advance the purpose of each online session that you're hosting. Tell them what to expect so that they can then make the informed choice that attending is relevant to their learning, that it's a good use of their time. This enables them to also come prepared for that advertised purpose. Now, students get very, very frustrated when you repeat content in a live session that's already been covered in self-paced elements, or maybe you spend your live session doing what they think is busy work just to fill in allotted hours. So use your live online time really purposefully and thoughtfully. Our third insight today is all about the content pathway. Yes, it is absolutely critical that you provide clarity about what learning materials and content and opportunities are available, and that you provide guidance about the best way for students to process their way through that content. What should they be accessing or doing, in what order and with what purpose? Now, a lot of courses have a mix of students who are already in the related occupation or who already have some relevant experience, and students who are completely new to the occupational sector. Therefore, it can be beneficial to provide 2 different study guides. So the students who need extra support or learning can be pointed to the supplementary resources. But this will save you from frustrating those students who don't need to revisit prerequisite foundation concepts that they're already familiar with. Now, some online learning systems place students in what we call a learning content tunnel. You know the type, click to continue, click to continue. You're being forced to read or view each page before the next page is made available. In general, this is not good practice. Students don't like being disempowered from making informed choices about how and when they engage with each element or topic or the item. They don't like not being able to see the type and quantity of content that's in front of them. So yes, provide very, very clear recommendations about the best pathways through the content. That's really critical. But locking them into a one-size-fits-all tunnel, it's generally not ideal. The final message today is to pursue progress over perfection. Many providers have been in survival mode recently with sudden transitions to online. But now's the time to move past that and start making proactive, conscious decisions about your online practice. What online experience do you want your students or your educators to be having? Now, my research has found that one reason some teams are struggling to move forward with developing online content or making the changes that they need to make is simply this sense of feeling overwhelmed, and that's completely logical. I mean, it can feel overwhelming if you sit down and think, gosh, I've got to plan, script and film 30 videos. But the message of progress over perfection, it's intended to encourage all RTOs to make a plan and get started. James Clear calculated the effect of small improvements over time. He found that if you get 1% better at something every day, just 1%, by the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better. Small, forward-moving steps really do matter. They add up. And yes, ASQA did approve me incorporating that message into this presentation today. So embrace progress over perfection. Start making those 1% improvements today and every day. Not sure where to start? Well, the first step is to get clarity about what mode of online education is right for you and your students. So going forward, will you be embracing a fully live online mode? Or will you embrace an automated, self-paced mode, repository style? Or perhaps you'll work towards something a little bit in between. None of these modes are right or wrong. None of them are better or worse. They're simply at different points on the spectrum of online education. Good teaching, good training, it can happen within any of these modes. So the right mode for you is going to depend on variables such as your topic at hand, the infrastructure and resources that are available, and obviously you'll be considering the preferences and needs of your particular students. So be clear about what's right for you and your context, and then methodically work towards it.
Thanks, Denise. It's good to hear these messages because we know student experiences are central to improve the transition to quality online delivery. I can see there are questions coming through to Slido. Please keep your questions coming through for our QA session. After this presentation, you can also upvote the questions you want answered. Our final panelist is Rachelle Matousek. Rachelle is the CEO of Opportune Professional Development, a vet provider offering learning and development opportunities. Over to you, Rachelle.
We deliver our qualifications to our clients who are medium to large clients in the corporate part of the market. We specialise in working with those clients to look at what they're trying to achieve with their teams in terms of immediate capability, as well as preparing their team members for the next step in their career. We design and deliver qualification programs that really integrate in with what the employer is also undertaking with their employees, so they get the benefit of developing on the job, achieving a qualification, and heading towards that next step in their career. The infection control skill set has quite a bit of theory to it, but the assessment is very, very practical. So we were faced with looking at how we blend both and actually develop those practical skills through the learning so they were very much ready for assessment. When we started, as we do with all the programs that we would design, we started with sort of that end in mind. So if we're looking at completions and likely completion rates, then really working backwards from there in terms of what would that student journey look like, and at what points might they be a little bit challenged, might they start to disengage. And what we found with looking at an online program, we were really challenged by not being able to be face-to-face, which for the last 15 years is what we have been used to, sort of being able to read the room, read the participants, have those individual discussions. So whereas when we first started, we thought we would be doing a lot of work around the LMS and the system as well as the content, we very much found ourselves spending a lot of time on who is this cohort, how are they likely to behave if they're not getting any face-to-face interaction, and how are we going to manage them throughout this journey to make sure they stay engaged and make sure we know if they're starting to disengage, so that very early on we knew how we would interact or interject in the process to try and motivate them and encourage them to complete. The infection control program has had some great outcomes. We had over 800 participants actually make their way through the program, had an 80% completion rate. The program has been externally validated and passed with flying colours, and it recently received the LearnX 2021 award for Best Pandemic Response for an e-learning course. So all round a great program that I think achieved some of those results through some good design and making sure we keep the participant, the workplace and the outcomes we're looking to achieve in mind, making sure we can measure along the way how people are tracking and provide that support as they need it, and making sure that you don't take any shortcuts in terms of making sure the participants have actually absorbed the learning content along the way before they head into their assessment. I think it's important when starting out with an online strategy is to not feel like you need to do it all yourself. Going from paper-based to a full online delivery is quite a journey. For us, it took a couple of years. We started small by offering assessment, and then we added enrolment to that, then some online delivery. So we built up over time, and our knowledge built over time, our internal capability, and we found partners along the way to work with us to make that happen. And I think that's really important. It's very difficult, and it's a completely different delivery strategy moving to online. But if you do it step by step and try and get some access to some people who've done it before, it makes all the difference. One of the best tips I could provide for anyone looking to implement online learning is to resist the temptation of finding generic content or generic assessments and then trying to find a cohort to fit them. I think to get really great completion rates, you need to almost get into the mind of the participants or the cohort that you're delivering to and really understand who they are, what their starting point is when they come to that online learning program, what environment they're working in, what support do they have in the workplace, what are the assessment requirements, and how possible is it for them to gather the evidence that you're going to ask them to gather. The infection control skill set had a number of areas that required us to observe, and if we were face-to-face, we would do that in the workplace and brief and observe the participant in the workplace. Things like hand washing, donning and dusting PPE, and a few other things that required them to follow a number of steps to show that they could apply infection control policies and procedures relevant to their workplace and their job role. When delivering online, we needed to be able to provide those instructions in a really clear way online and in a format that allowed them to have that next to them as they were undertaking those tasks and filming them. Something they were already a little bit apprehensive about doing. No one particularly likes videoing themselves. So making sure that those instructions are clear and provided in participant language and in a way that it's really easy for them to access them as they're completing their assessment task became really, really important. And we saw less people getting sort of stuck at that point or needing to resubmit their videos when we really had a strong emphasis on getting that right.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to hear some of your experiences of transitioning online. I think there's a lot that we can learn from case studies of approaches providers have taken. A big thank you to all the presenters that we've just heard from. We're now going to turn to our panel for the Q&A questions or session. A final reminder to use Slido for any questions. The event code is #onlinelearning. You can scan the QR code on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Now, to start off, I'd like to put this question to the panel. It's clearly inspired by Kipley's discussion of providers surveyed for the Insight paper series. The question we have is, can you identify some considerations when assessing student suitability for courses being delivered partly or fully online? I'll throw this first question to you, Denise.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Yeah, that is a really good question and one that's getting asked a lot. So I've got a couple of points to make on that. I would say first, ensure that you've got absolute clarity between digital literacy to facilitate online learning and learning digital skills online. They're two very, very different things. So we need to talk a lot about digital literacy for learning online. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution to assessing each student's access to technology and their ability to use the tools that are necessary. I've got one really good example to share from a real provider. So they'd spent money on an automated software solution. So from an email, students were being asked to log in and complete a little test of their digital literacy and confirm things like digital access. Now, the problem with that system was it frustrated the heck out of the average student. They felt demoralized at having to click their way through a fairly basic sort of checklist at the beginning. It got more intense, but the first sort of 5-10 minutes was really basic. Students got really frustrated because it wasn't necessary for most students. And so what happened, it was negatively impacting their optimism about the course ahead. And we know how important optimism for learning is when students go into a new program. Now, the problem with that same automated system for the students who did have digital literacy challenges, they got left feeling really inadequate and they felt like they were wrong because they failed the first hurdle. So you can see it's not working out real well. So we just finished a trial where instead of using that system, every new student got a good old-fashioned human-to-human phone call. They got a general discussion about digital experience, knowledge, and access to technology. Those are really important. And so the students in that trial who did have digital literacy challenges, they came back saying that they felt really supported and they appreciated that on that phone call there was some immediate problem solving and there was some really critical encouragement that a computer just can't give you. And that happened on the phone call. And the students who didn't have challenges also felt cared for and also they got let off the call in about 90 seconds. And so what I recommend here is a pre-course digital orientation where students who need it learn some of those digital skills that they are going to use in the course and some general how to learn skills that usually go hand in hand with that and only for those who actually need it. And what I'm noticing here in a couple of trials I've helped with is that there are some students who are really nervous about learning online. Everyone's heard the horror stories, right? And so if they're nervous about learning online, especially if they're challenged with their own digital skills, and so they're not yet ready to commit to the learning or they're a bit nervous, if you can give them access to your digital orientation module, as that's a really good way to help them to understand what to expect from learning online it's going to help them make an informed decision about whether this mode and with you as the provider is a good fit. And we're finding that then when they do go ahead, their readiness to learn is better and their completion's better, their optimism's better, all that sort of stuff. So those are the things I would take into consideration, not a one-size-fits-all solution.
And that makes sense, you know, really the student being at the centre and ensuring that they're comfortable within the environment. Now we have another question. Do you have any recommendations or ideas for managing volume of learning in fully online courses? Judith, I think this might be one for you to respond to.
Thanks,
Over
Sharon.
to you.
Yes, certainly volume of learning is a consideration when delivering VET courses, as many of the attendees in the webinar today will know. And part of that, I guess, is considering both the learning resources that are made available in the online learning environment and also to the assessment as well. With respect to those resources, I guess it is possible to actually make a determination about how long it may take an average a student commencing the course with I guess no knowledge to actually complete the course. However, for other students, they may already be familiar with the resources that are made, some of the resources that are made available through that course, and therefore the duration of the course may be shorter as well for those students. So there is, I guess, no definitive answer to that, but the point certainly that Denise made earlier is really for each individual student, the amount of time that they spend undertaking the course will naturally vary, and it will depend largely on their existing skills and their prior knowledge that they bring into the course as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Judith. Is there any more, Denise or Rachel, that you want to add to that?
I think what I was going to mention is that I don't think it's necessarily all or nothing. If you're moving to online, I think there's still some opportunities, particularly if you've got learners that are in the workplace, to give them some structured and directed activities back into the workplace, and then come back online to report back on how that went, or report back in a a live type session as well. So mixing that up to build some of those hours and get the practical application as well is something that we have looked at.
Thank you, Rachel. There's more questions coming through. As this is a fluid area of delivery, how often do we need to update our training and assessment strategy to match what we are doing at any one time? Denise or Rachel?
I think that might actually be a question for Judith. It feels
Judith?
compliance
Yes,
to me.
Sorry, Judith, sorry.
That's fine.
I would say it's
I was thinking
all
from
the time,
a
always up to date. But over to you, Judith, if you've got a different
Certainly from a regulatory perspective, the expectation is that training and assessment practice aligns with your intended strategy. And I do recall last year we had a webinar about distance education, and at the time we spoke about moving to deliver online and the need to actually update the training and assessment strategy to reflect that. So there's no, I guess, sort of benchmark around how often that should occur, but it's really when it should occur. And that is if there's a change in your mode of delivery, we would expect that would be reflected within the training and assessment strategy. Keeping in mind that the training and assessment strategy is meant to be a useful document, not just a document to be presenting to ASQA, but it's actually a document for your organisation that will provide a framework for the delivery of your training and assessment, and ensuring that you're going to be meeting all of the training package requirements. And that is particularly important when we consider online assessment and considering whether or not the learners will in fact be able to complete the assessment in a way that will satisfy the training package requirements as well.
Yeah. I noted that you said that ASQA had delivered something last year. Is that available on the ASQA website?
Yes, Sharon, it is. There's a series of recordings of webinars that were held last year, and the webinar that I was specifically referring to is our distance, I think it was called Distance Learning Essentials webinar, and there is a recording there, along with several other webinars related to the strategic review, the online strategic review feedback loops. There's recordings there of those webinars as well.
That's good to know. We've got another question. Can you make some practical suggestions for providers to support trainers and assessors to expand and enhance on their own digital literacy? Rachel?
Yeah, in our experience, we have, it's been about putting those trainers and assessors back into a learner mode, because it is quite a different mode of learning, assigning them someone that is good at it and has had some experience with online learning, letting them watch it, have a look at the tips, the techniques of delivering online, doing it together and having that review in place. So a lot of coaching has come after them actually sort of learning some of the techniques. I mean, Denise has probably got some more around how to teach them some of those techniques, but at a practical level, just lots of practice and having a coach is what we found successful.
And Denise, you do support organisations and educators to transition into that online environment. Have you got any further suggestions?
Yeah, it's absolutely something that's very critical. It can't be left to chance. It has to be a very conscious and proactive thing that needs to be happening for everyone. I think, again, make sure there's absolute clarity about the fundamental difference between digital skills to use your online system and skills to teach with that online system. They're two different things. And so one of the most common flaws or struggles I'm seeing in a lot of the PD that's happening is there's a really heavy focus on teaching people how to use a digital tool or how to use parts of the learning management system. There's a lot of what button to press in what order. We need to actually focus more on using the tool in a way that is good for the educator and good for the student. So sometimes there's a really good strategy put out there and everyone's saying, gosh, it's best practice, but it's a workload killer. It's not practical. And other times they're saying, oh, you need to use this tool, but it actually doesn't make teaching any better. And so we've got to really, just because something's fancy doesn't mean it's good. So I'd say make sure that the people who are doing your delivery, doing your coaching, they're talking about how and why of digital teaching strategies. Why is this tool good when used in this way for this purpose at this time? And so I would strongly recommend not making assumptions with your team members. You need to talk to them about where they're feeling uncertain, where they're feeling there are knowledge gaps. The best conversation you can have is, what's the difference? Where's the gap between what you would ideally like to be doing and what you are doing? What parts of your practice just don't feel good right now? That's your biggest clue of where that person needs some PD and some support and some new strategies to help them be able to do the things that they want to be able to do for their students.
Yeah, and it's really that. Sorry, Rachel, go. No, you go.
I was just going to mention something we found helpful for our trainers and assessors was to take the session plan that they usually, they would have one that would use face-to-face and recreate that for online with a lot of those tips and techniques. I think sometimes some of the trainers were like, oh, well, I'll just take the face-to-face session plan and convert that, and they're complete opposite things. So, yeah, still keeping to those sorts of structures were really useful for them to have a guide and when they're going to use those different techniques through the sessions.
And it's really about that balance of using the technology, but also understanding the purpose of the technology. And what you said, Denise, in particular, something that's got all the bells and whistles may not be any useful tool. It may be just something that's quite simple that'll engage with students. We've got another question that's just come through. What is acceptable evidence to replace assessors' workplace observations? I think this might be a question for you, Judith.
Yes, one of the key considerations is with respect to assessor observations, as whether or not the skills need to be demonstrated in the workplace, and also too that would be determined by the training package requirements to begin with. But also too, we've discussed once again in previous webinars about ways that evidence of performance in the workplace could be gathered using, for example, video recordings. There might be live observations that can occur when the assessor can't be physically present in the workplace, or a student may submit a recording that occurred at one point in time to the assessor, and the assessor can then use a checklist to review the recording, and the checklist identifies the skills that or the behaviours that the student needs to demonstrate, and that can then be retained as evidence. It may be possible too that in some instances a third-party report may be able to be used and may be acceptable as part of the evidence gathering process. And certainly, once again, there's guidance on ASQA's website around around third-party evidence. And I guess at all times is really considering the sufficiency of the evidence and the validity of the evidence as well. So those are the key considerations. As I said, it will differ depending on the context and the qualification.
Thanks, Judith. We've got a question that is actually in two parts. What specific examples should providers be aware of for rules of evidence? And I believe that'd be more something that you can respond to, Judith. And then there's the second part, which is more what are good examples of authenticity that might be more appropriate for Rachel and Denise to respond to. So do you want to respond to the first part, Judith? Do you want me to?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. I will respond to that. So in terms of the rules of evidence, just previously I spoke about the validity of the assessment evidence, and that's certainly a very important consideration. I guess one of the because we have other options in terms of delivery online, there's a temptation to actually attempt to gather evidence of a student's knowledge as opposed to performance. So that's certainly something that needs to be considered when we're moving into the online environment. Are we just assessing the student's knowledge, or do we have a mechanism in place where we can gather evidence of their performance? And we spoke before about performance in the workplace. Also too, as I mentioned previously, when we speak about the sufficiency of the evidence, so certainly a student who's completed just an online assessment, that assessment piece may provide one form of evidence, but once again, we might be considering other forms of evidence as well. For example, if a student has actually developed or worked on a product in the workplace, for example, in the construction area, they may be able to provide or upload a video through the online system that demonstrates their skills in that area as well. And certainly the next part of the question that I think we're going to pass to one of the other panelists, which is around authenticity. So that is also a consideration in the online environment. And I might pass that over to Denise and Rachel to respond to.
Sure. We have used a couple of things with authenticity. First of all, for all around sort of written answers, we have used multi-factor authentication to cover that off, so that we know that the participant that's completing the answers to the questions is the person that was originally enrolled. And then when it comes to things like observations with videos, we had participants show us their identification as part of their video upload. So we could actually see who they were and compare that to the identification we had collected when we originally enrolled them. So there's sort of a couple of ways that we've dealt with authenticity in the couple of programs we've run. Not sure, Denise, if you've got anything to add to what you've seen? No.
No, we've got further questions still coming through. How can we stimulate peer support networks when all students are working asynchronously, online? Denise, can you respond to that?
Sure, absolutely. The first thing I'd say about this is actually a really good question. So you're going to be surprised by the way I answer this. Don't assume your students actually want it. And I know all the textbooks say that we're supposed to provide peer-to-peer support networks. students don't all want it. Some of them find it distracting and unnecessary and that sort of thing. Some of your students are quite happy to be left alone, engaging with you rather than each other. They're not they may not see learning as a social thing. They may not value that sense of community. And especially, think about certain students who are really time poor. They want to focus the time they do have on active learning. So don't make the assumption that it's important for all students all the time. Ask your students what they need, what they want. Things like homework club is one of the best things you can do. Therefore, it's optional. It's they only dial in if they need it, that kind of thing. And there's somebody there to help them with this sort. But just the idea that, let's all do our homework together. Don't assume your students do want it, but that's the kind of thing that they do want. Now, if you're incorporating peer-to-peer collaborative learning, that's great, but only ever do that if it's good for the learning at hand. If it's not really purposeful and adding value, students again are going to say, you're wasting my time with busy work. It's something that they really resent. So when we're asynchronous, there are some strategies where you can get students engaging with each other, things like discussion forums, even if they're not, you can actually get them engaging with comments that students made last semester in this semester, leaving comments for next semester's students. There's stuff you can do like that. But if you want that active peer network stuff, homework club is a winning strategy.
Yeah, it's all about responding to what the students' needs are and adapting and meeting their requirements, and it's not going to be one model fits all, is it? We've got one final question before we need to wrap up today's webinar. The final question, will trainer and assessors need the e-learning modules proposed in the new TAE to be able to train and assess online? Judith?
Thanks. Yes, thanks, Sharon. At this stage, I'm not aware of that requirement. I would suggest that ASQA will advise the sector if that is a requirement going forward. Having said that, there's been many examples that have been provided today of ways in which trainers and assessors are supporting each other in developing skills in e-learning, and certainly in our work at ASQA, we do see that as well, and have noticed that there's significant sharing and I guess mentoring that's occurring within registered training organisations as trainers and assessors support each other in acquiring those skills. And certainly one organisation that I was speaking with just earlier this week, they mentioned that they are in fact developing an internal professional development module that they will be making available to their trainers and assessors to ensure that they've got the skills to be able to deliver effectively online going forward.
Thank you for that, Judith. I will now have to wrap up the Q&A. Thanks all for your valuable input. Before we finish today, our strategic review team is looking for other provider case studies to showcase your effective practices for delivering online. We really recognise the value of sharing experiences such as Rachel's experience of moving the infection control skill set online. Let us know if you wanted to take part in our strategic review. A final thank you again to our presenters and panellists for taking the time to join us today. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. Your questions have been interesting, on point, and created some great discussion. We really appreciate it if you could complete our post-webinar survey, which will appear on the screen shortly. The survey questions will help us to ensure our webinars and events are beneficial to all of you. And of course, if you haven't already signed up for our monthly newsletter, ASQA Update, you can subscribe through our main web page. That's the same where all our online resources are that we've been mentioned a few times today. Again, thank you for your time today. See you next time.